concerns raised over Bitwarden moving further away from open source. Honestly, I'm kind of quoting most of the whole article here because it's a very short article. Following a recent pull request to the Bitwarden client that introduces a, quote, Bitwarden / SDK - internal, unquote, dependency to build the desktop client, there is the following clause on the license statement. You may not use this SDK to develop applications for use with software other than Bitwarden, including non-compatible implementations of Bitwarden, or to develop another SDK. The issue of this effectively not making the Bitwarden client free software was raised in a GitHub issue. Other users have chimed in being concerned over this change and the SDK not being legally permitted for use outside of Bitwarden proper. Bitwarden founder and CTO Kyle Spearin has commented on the ticket this morning. Quote, we have been progressing the use of our SDK in more use cases for our clients. However, our goal is to make sure that the SDK is used in a way that maintains GPL compatibility. 1, the SDK and the client are 2 separate programs. 2, code for each program is in separate repositories. And 3, the fact that the 2 programs communicate using standard protocols does not mean they are one program for the purposes of GPL v3. Being able to build the app as you are trying to do here is an issue we plan to resolve and is merely a bug. The ticket was subsequently locked and limited to collaborators. We'll see what comes ahead for Bitwarden and open source. So for those of you who do not speak FOSS, like myself, from what I understand, this is a licensing issue. For the record, I don't want to downplay, I think, the open source people in the sense of like the literal definition of open source, like being able to modify the code and share it around and stuff like that. I think you guys do have some very legitimate concerns and arguments. I'm not trying to downplay that. But practically, people such as myself are far more interested in source available. Well, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I'm really interested in source available. To me, that's the big thing is, can other people look at the code? Can we make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do? And then after that, yes, it'd be really nice if also people can modify the code and change it and stuff like that. So to that end, it is still source available. I don't think there's any indication that that's changing. It's just licensing. And again, I want to acknowledge, I think this is kind of crappy potentially, but I think it's also like, I see a lot of people just like, oh, well, time to ditch Bitwarden. And it's like, not necessarily. I mean, again, if you're one of those people who's like, no, this is like licensing matters too, sure, fair enough. But I think it's a little bit early to be, especially for all the work involved in changing password managers. I mean, sure, it's relatively easy. You export, you import, you change plugins or extensions, but I don't know. I personally am not going anywhere yet, but I'm definitely going to try to keep an eye on this.
Yeah, I think a quick update. I don't know if you got this. It happened like within the last 24 hours, and it was done very casually. I only know it because Abdullah, who's behind notes, left a comment on our forum. But Bitwarden GPL the license on their internal SDK on their GitHub. So it's now covered by both GPL v3 and their own Bitwarden SDK license 1.0, which should resolve this problem for people. It's confusing because I think now they're using 2 licenses, which is really bizarre. But it looks like it is under GPL v3 now, from what I can tell. I'm with you. I think people really, again, I'm somebody who enjoys and believes in open source. But on my end, the big thing I really appreciate about open source is the transparency that it provides and the ability for people to be able to analyze the code, check it for security vulnerabilities, and also check to make sure there's nothing fishy going on with the privacy. Source available still accomplishes that. What it doesn't accomplish, like Nate was saying, is pretty much sticking to proper FOSS ideals, which is people can redistribute it, do whatever they want with it, and modify it to their liking. So I see them as 2 different arguments, 2 different reasons to use open source software. So even if Bitwarden moved to some source available model, which it doesn't look like they're going to right now, but this was kind of an alarming situation, I still wouldn't discourage people using Bitwarden if it's still source available. And this is kind of something I've changed my stance on over time, because I know Vivaldi's community, this is something that Vivaldi gets attacked for. People say Vivaldi's not open source. Vivaldi's source available. You can see exactly all the code that's running in a Vivaldi browser. You're just not allowed to fork it and make it your own browser, essentially. There are many other reasons I wouldn't push Vivaldi for privacy and security, actually, and it has nothing to do with the fact that it's source available. It's just because there are browsers that have better privacy technologies baked into the browsers that prevent third-party tracking a little bit better than Vivaldi. They just have other types of protections in there that Vivaldi doesn't quite have. But I think it's a little bit silly to not use Vivaldi because it's source available, in my opinion, unless you're just someone who believes in the philosophy of open source, which is also extremely valid. But I think it's not the norm. I think a lot of it is people who think it's not privacy or security respecting.
I'm doing a a video on device fingerprinting. I think I mentioned that before. I'm about halfway done. And last night I did the bit where I was like, as an aside, Chrome and Vivaldi are the only two browsers that do not block third-party cookies by default.
Thanks for watching this clip. It's actually taken from the Surveillance Report podcast, which is our full-length podcast where we talk about privacy and security news every single week. We post it on YouTube as a video. We also post it on PeerTube for those of you who don't like YouTube. And we also post it as an audio version that you can find on every major podcasting app, as well as just RSS. Check us out either here on the screen somewhere or at surveillancereport.tech, and stay up to date out there so you can keep yourself and the people around you safe.